Nonviolence, to what extent, is the subject this morning. Nonviolence, to what extent? I think the key to the situation which we should remember is that we must be reasonable in considering this subject of nonviolence. In other words, nonviolence is a very high ideal. There's no question that it takes one nearer the soul. But there is also another aspect to our lives, and that is that we have a part to play in this drama of life. And as each and every one of us has that part to play, so has every nation that particular part to play, including especially America and India. Of course, nonviolence is practiced for what? For peace. But political peace is not lasting peace. The only lasting peace comes when you change the hearts of men, when they see the one common Father, the great light of God, from which all have come. When you see and know that, then you will have the proper feeling, the proper relationship with each and every other child of God. Until that comes, peace will not come. And so nonviolence should be looked into with that in mind. That is, to bring about the real lasting peace of the souls of all, not just one nation, but the souls of all. As I read from the Gita shortly, you will see that when you have a clearer understanding, a deeper vision as to the purpose of life, that it will change your idea of nonviolence. So I will read that just in a moment. First, I want to point out an interesting incident that happened back in Massachusetts in 1919. Calvin Coolidge was governor then, and there was a police strike which came about in Boston. It had been brewing, and finally it broke forth, and what happened? The policemen left their jobs, and the people were without protection. Now, nonviolence wouldn't help in a situation like that. The good of the people was at stake, the good of a great percentage of the people throughout all the land, by that one incident of striking against the public safety. Now, Mr. Coolidge, in the face of losing his prestige and perhaps his election, which was coming up shortly, what did he do? He called out the entire militia of Massachusetts and took care of the situation. Because he said, if you present the truth to people, they will accept it. Now, whether he was a Democrat or a Republican doesn't make any difference. The fact was that he understood one of the principles, especially of America, that each and every one of us has a right to freedom, and that freedom would be impaired if he allowed that strike to go on. And so he said these wonderful words. He said, there is no right to strike against the public safety of anybody, anytime, anywhere. So you see, in that case, nonviolence would not help. But he had to take a firm attitude, resist. And as I read from the Gita, you will see that that is just what we have to do. We have to practice nonviolence up to a certain point. But when our conscience comes in and says, now listen, enough of that, resist, fight, then we have to do it. Because there are two aspects of our existence here. One is to maintain our peace with God. And that will not come unless we perform the second, which is to perform our duty dictated by God and conscience. Now, if we remember that law, we'll have no trouble in answering the questions about nonviolence. I'd like to read from the Gita. In the preface, the 13th and 15th pages. In the midst of turmoil, he must rest in the Lord of peace. You see, in spite of the wars, in spite of all things, we must rest in God, in the cosmic sphere which I spoke of a few minutes ago. In the midst of turmoil, he must rest in the Lord of peace, discharging every duty to the fullest, not because he seeks the result of his actions, but because it is his duty to perform them. Now, we cannot have and retain the peace of God unless we perform our duty according to our position in this drama of life. Now, that's very important. Every nation, especially India and America, of which I will speak, has a certain position in this drama of life. America has a position, India has a position, all other countries. It is up to us to do our duty to preserve that position in which God has placed every nation. Unless we do that duty, we will not carry out one of the two important things, the first, perhaps the greatest, to maintain our peace with God. Then he goes on. As though to make the lesson more impressive, it was given on the field of battle. Arjuna, the warrior prince, was to vindicate his brother's title, to destroy a usurper who was oppressing the land. It was his duty as a prince, a warrior, to fight for the deliverance of his nation and to restore order and peace. To make the contest more bitter, loved comrades and friends stood on both sides. This is the hard thing to reconcile. Wringing his heart with personal anguish and making a conflict of duties as well as physical strife. Could he slay those to whom he owed love and duty, and trample on ties of kindred? To break family ties was a sin. To leave the people in cruel bondage was a sin. Which was right? Justice must be done, else the law would be disregarded. But how to slay without sin? In Boston, justice must be done. The law would certainly have been disregarded then. Now here is the answer. Have no personal interest in the event. Have no attachment of possession or personal interest in the event. Carry out the duty imposed by the position in life. Now, he was there in that position. It was his duty to fight. We, being here in America, have a certain duty to perform because of the position America is placed. Carry out the duty imposed by the position in life. Realize that God the Father, once the Lord and the law, is the doer, working out the mighty evolution that ends in bliss and peace. Even in spite of all these discrepancies, paradoxes, what's the end? Bliss and peace in His presence. That's what we have to realize. Our vision must not be narrowed like the conscientious objective. We must see beyond into the end to do God's will. Then he goes on. Be identified with Him by devotion. These are the two important things. Be identified with Him by devotion, and then perform duty as duty. Fighting without passion of desire, without anger, attachment. If we do that, thus activity forges no bond. Yoga or union with God is accomplished, and the soul is free. So there are the highlights in how we should act. We should take a wider vision, a deeper vision, and see that this drama of life is a play of God. We have to do that. We have to do that duty because God has placed us, especially in America, in a certain position, as I will come to shortly. Now half of the world is destroyed. Half of the world has been destroyed by wars for one reason: in search of peace. So something must be done about it. There's something wrong. But nonviolence is not the answer. Nonviolence will help. Nonviolence, especially in the beginning, when controversies arise, will help to smooth them out before the anger comes and nations fight. Nonviolence will help. It is not the answer. The answer, as I have said, comes when you change the hearts of men. And they feel the peace of God by realizing the oneness of the common Father, that we are all His children. Then lasting peace will come, and not until then. When people and nations, through such efforts as the Master has brought here, self-realization, whereby you have the means and the end to contact God, realize the one common Father, then naturally peace must come. And so remember, nonviolence is good, but it is not the final answer. We should realize that. We should practice nonviolence as much as possible to keep from starting the trouble. But we must also, and this is very important, be ever watchful, ever on the watch for what God has given us. We must never forget that God has given us this country. We must never forget that. The Master was very adamant in that position. When you ask those who have come from other countries, Europe and other places, ask them about America. Ask them, what's the difference? They will tell you the difference is this. In America, God has placed this country in a position. It has made America the land where the consciousness of freedom is predominant. That's what we must not forget. Once more, God has placed America in a position. She is the land where the consciousness of freedom is predominant. Go in the other countries and see how you feel. See if you feel this freedom. We must not ever forget that. Look at the Bill of Rights. Freedom of speech, freedom, you know the different freedoms. That's what America was placed here by God, to do just that, to give the world the consciousness of freedom. Therefore, we must preserve it. Why? Because God has made it that way. That's why. So remember, in America, is the consciousness of freedom. Now, in India is a land where the consciousness, spiritual treasure, has been held and sustained throughout the ages. It is the land where the transcendental consciousness is predominant. And that's why India should be preserved just the same as America. Because that transcendental consciousness has been there throughout the ages. That is the hope of the world from a spiritual aspect. But America is the hope of the world from the political aspect. The freedom is there in America. We must preserve it. It is our duty. If we do not, if practicing nonviolence we come to a point where it will not be of any avail, then we must resist and fight to preserve what God has given us and the world. That's an important thing in considering this question of nonviolence. People come here. Why? Why did they come? Because for freedom from oppression, religious freedom. And so it is our duty to preserve that. If America falls, the rest of the world would be in dire straits, without question. Because remember, America has been placed in that position, as I read in the Gita. According to your position, perform your duty. And so America is placed in that position, and we must preserve it. We must perform our duty according to the position of the land, America, in which we find ourselves. To retain the consciousness of freedom of America is just as important as to retain the consciousness of spiritual things, transcendental consciousness, which is found in India. As the Master has said, he said about war, he says, fight the war of defense, but not a war of aggression. Fight a war of defense. Think of your own family and your own home. If someone came there to take them away, to do them bodily harm, what would you do? Stand there and practice nonviolence? You would for a little while, then you'd say, get out of here before I get after you. Naturally. God is not a weakling. God is strong. And so remember, fight for defense, sure, not for aggression, not to attain things, not for possession. That's the key, is when possession enters into it, when attachment enters into the war, which it has been doing for centuries, that's why peace does not come. Try by all methods, including nonviolence, to prevent strife and war. But when your conscience dictates to you that that's far enough, now you must resist. You must resist. You must fight. Then fight. Otherwise you will not have that first requisite I read in the Gita. You will not have that communion, that relationship with God of peace and joy. We must do that. We lose that relationship. Why? Because we do not follow the dictates of our conscience. We must follow that. We must follow that. Now, a conscientious objector, he doesn't go far enough. He doesn't have the wide vision. A regular fellow may be a rough fellow, but he feels something that conscientious objector does not. So we can look about us in nature, we can see where one thing kills another and all that. But we must look beyond that and see that we are puppets in the show of God. And no matter what we do, no matter what position we carry out, as long as we do our duty, we will have His grace and His protection. We will have His peace and His joy. We should consider these things in nonviolence. Now going on just a little bit, and then I'll be through. I do not believe, and I'm sure all of you do not believe, that nonviolence will work in the case of communism. Because communism is founded on what? On force. On force. Jesus preached and taught real communism. It is quite different. But this communism of Russia is not the same. Russian communism is a disease. It is a disease. Speaking about Russian communism, I thought of a little story. Someone came from there and they said they had beds 12 feet long. One fellow said that's quite some bunk. I thought that was quite expressive. Quite a bunk. But we remember, Russian communism is a disease, and we must fight the disease. Just like in drunkenness. We shouldn't have any animosity toward the person who is intoxicated. We should have our hatred toward the disease itself. And so the same with communism. We fight the disease, not the Russian people. They're just the same as we are, children of God. but the disease we must fight. We can hate the disease. We can hate the disease, especially if it will arouse us to resist and fight not with attachment. Karma comes in. You can hate a thing all right, but the karma comes in when you retaliate with feeling and attachment. That's when the karma comes in. But if you retaliate, treating it just as a duty which God has imposed upon you, there is no karma. Remember that. It's when that feeling enters in. Possession, as the nations all have. Hate, possession. Hate with attachment. But when you realize that God has placed you in America to preserve the freedom which America stands for through His will, and you act that way as a duty, there is no karma. And you'll be nearer to God even though you have to go to war and fight than if you resist and do not have the deeper vision to realize God's great plan. And so let us remember that in talking about this question of nonviolence. We should remember these things about karma and hate. Use nonviolence as much as possible, especially in the beginning. Because if you immediately start to fight with a person, then everything's lost and the fight is on. But if you use nonviolence, bringing out the good of those people rather than increasing their hate, that will help. But when it comes to a point, when your conscience says to you, now listen, that's enough, you must resist now and fight, then do just that. Fight. Fight, realizing that God and conscience are on your side. I think the Master had a wonderful approach to these things. I used to hate to think about war. Naturally, we all do. But when I talked to him and he pointed these things out, especially about a war of defense. Of course, he came from a foreign land where three of them couldn't talk in a corner even, but they were watched. And he felt the freedom of America. And he said, you must preserve America. Fight for defense. Then I began to wake up. I could see that he, being a saint even, had a much deeper and broader vision than I ever had. And so to sum the whole situation up, we must do all those things that we can to change the hearts of men, because that is when real lasting peace will come. Do all those things, including nonviolence, but you have a far greater and positive method through the teachings and the techniques of self-realization which the Master has brought to you. You know yourself when you practice and meditate and feel the great love of God and see His infinite light. You know your heart is filled with peace. You know you could hardly fight with anyone. Sometimes people get after me and I should say something, I just can't, because I realize that it's just a play of God's great love. We should do that. We should try to preserve the peace of the world, especially the peace which will be lasting to all souls, wherein the heart is changed. We should do that. And we should practice nonviolence for that purpose. But when the time comes that your consciousness, your conscience says fight, then fight. Then resist. Resist with all your strength of soul. Why? Because God and conscience are on your side. And by so doing, you will retain the first and greatest thing, your peace with God. Because you will carry out the duty which God has imposed upon you as you take your place in the drama of life. Which duty is presented to you by your own small voice of conscience. So let us realize, nonviolence is good. But when God says, through conscience, to do this, to do that, to resist, then let us resist, because the first and greatest commandment is what? To love God with all our strength and soul, and therefore to do His great will.
We invite you to attend the full order of our regular weekly services for inspiration and guidance in the teachings of self-realization. reap the harvest of eternal bliss through a life of consecrated spiritual devotion to God. Attend our evening of meditation with us here at the church each Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. Join with us each Thursday evening at 8 p.m. at the Hermitage in Encinitas in a study and meditation class. This is an inspiring evening given to Bible interpretations and the vital teachings of SRF that will bring the joy of God to you as a reality. An outstanding book that is catching the attention of readers throughout the world from continent to continent is Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramhansa Yogananda. It is a book written by our own yogi master about yogis, the subtle but definite spiritual laws by which they perform miracles and attain complete self-mastery. The thoughtful reader will lay this book aside only to open it again and again for inspiration and guidance in daily life. Ask to see a copy of this unusual life document this morning after the service at our book table. Fading into obscurity, reappearing momentarily, then playing elusive just behind the veil, we endeavor to lift and perceive the luminous splendor of one who is eternal. Responsive to our call made earnestly, yet will he not reveal himself. How long, cries the devotee, will this masquerade endure? This brief resume of the cosmic masquerade will be explained in more revealing terms here at the church next Sunday morning at 11 by Dr. Lewis. The invaluable SRF Precepta lessons furnished to all members is used as his guide in forming all lectures, coupled with scriptural interpretations and realizations. Those of you who are here for the first time today may possibly have many questions concerning the nature of this work or of the advantages of becoming a member in Self-Realization Fellowship. Won't you stop at our book table after the service this morning and get acquainted with the attendant who will supply you with information concerning membership and other related material?